Welcome to the testing room of the Parallax Corporation's Division of Human Engineering. You will now please cross to the chair. And you will sit down, make yourself comfortable, and be sure to place each one of your hands on the box on either side of the chair, making sure that each one of your fingers is on one of the white rectangles. Just sit back, nothing is required of you except to observe the visual materials that are presented to you. Be sure to keep your fingers on the box at all times. All right? We hope you find the test a pleasant experience.
Those draconian measures involve what is effectively a full lockdown in Hubei province, and look at the consequences. These are pictures from a major railway station in Wuhan, which is the biggest city in Hubei. This is a city of 11 million people, and you can see it looks like it's deserted. And we're learning lots of things about how the government's going about enforcing that lockdown. This is an interesting report from the New York Times. It tells us China is now requiring people to use software on their smartphones which tells them where they can go. People are also being given color codes that indicates their health status, and then that data from the app is shared with police. This story is by a tech reporter called Paul Wazir. Here he is tweeting, "Many who have red or yellow codes now lead lives as partial pariahs. With the digital scarlet letter, they can't go out or return to work. Plenty don't understand why their code is red or yellow, yet when they call up a complaint hotline, it's generally busy." And these restrictions, we should say, are very unlikely to disappear anytime soon.
How effective are these small measures that we're seeing advertised from various authorities about how to stop yourself from getting it? I've seen things like don't use cash, avoid using cash where you can, don't touch buttons in elevators, use your elbow, don't touch door handles. I mean, how effective are those things? Or what things should people be doing to stop themselves from getting sick?
Those are all little common sense things that we should always be practicing. We should always be aware of what we're touching and where we put our hands, and because this is usually the way that we transfer a lot of germs to our bodies, and often we touch our faces, so that's a natural way for us to acquire infections. So I think all of these little measures added together, everybody practice them, and we could trust that everybody else was doing the right thing, then we can slow down the spread of the virus.
This all comes as Beijing takes even more extreme measures to try to contain the virus. The central bank has devised a plan to deep clean China's cash. So the way this works is that cash is going to be sanitized with UV light, and then for 7 days it'll be quarantined for most of the parts of China, but in the epicenter the quarantine will be for 14 days. And then money that is in hospitals or comes from the market or public transportation at the epicenter is going to be destroyed. And by that I mean state media say that the money will be shredded, and then it's going to be packed into bricks and then sent to the local power plant where it's going to be incinerated and then turned into energy.
Welcome to the testing room of the Parallax Corporation's Division of Human Engineering. That is such a great line. I stole that little scene from a movie called The Parallax View, 1974, starring Warren Beatty. Interesting film. The Division of Human Engineering. I love that word. Because indeed, where to begin? I think we'll start here. So here's one more little clip, but such a great segue.
What I will say of this virus, I think we're in the middle of a massive experiment worldwide. And
where are the guinea pigs?
Maybe. The experiment is, will people listen to scientists? In this case, referring to medical professionals. In this particular case.
Say Anthony Fauci over at Allergy and Infectious Disease.
For example, and are you washing your hands? And are you taking these precautions? These are warnings offered by scientists. And
for our own good.
For our own good. And it seems to me, if we all listened and all paid attention, don't freak out, right? Don't live in a life lived in fear is a life half lived. So you don't want to. I'm just. So I'd be interesting if we all paid attention to what scientists say. Maybe the coronavirus will just blow on by with a minimum of cases, and then we kicked its ass for obeying the recommendations of scientists on how to minimize your chances of getting it. That would be. It's an interesting experiment we're in the middle of.
I hope we win. I hope science wins.
Yes.
I hope knowledge comes out on top this time. Yes. What year? Or this is the 50th, right?
50th, a nice round year for Earth.
Okay.
Earth year. Earth Day.
So what should this 50th? Seeing how we're treating the Earth, should we celebrate Earth Day or just apologize to the Earth this time around?
We should do both.
Yeah.
First apologize and then tell Earth how you're going to make things better. And let me just tell you something. You know when the first Earth Day was 1970? You know why it was in 1970? How come it wasn't in 1960 or 1965
I don't
or 1980?
know. I have a feeling you're about to tell me.
Yes. We were actively going to and walking on the moon by 1970. With this spacecraft, the Saturn V. So sorry, all of us didn't make it to the moon. Just a little upper part here with astronauts.
Right,
because you need that much fuel to pull that off.
Sure.
So then, we go to the moon to explore the moon, and we turn around, and we discover Earth for the first time.
And in its entirety.
In its entirety. Earth.
Not enough guests.
Earth.
Bring visual aids. Thank you very much.
I'm just saying, Earth. And there it was, just alone in the vacuum dark of space. And you see it not as the social studies classroom globe showed you. There were no color-coded countries on it. All you saw was blue oceans and dry land and clouds. And at that moment, everyone changed. Everybody said, oh my gosh, pollution is not just this river behind my house or this lake. It is global. We have to think about Earth as a planet. And you know what happened in 1970? Earth Day was founded. The Environmental Protection Agency was voted into existence. By the way, by a Republican president. And what else happened? Over those years that we were walking on the moon, up through 1973, leaded gas was banned. What else happened? The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration was founded to take a look at the climate on Earth. No one before had thought of connecting the oceans and the clouds before, and they're both in the same title of that agency. A Comprehensive Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, all that happened while we were going to the moon. And people ask, why are we going in space? You know why are you going in space? Because a cosmic perspective can descend upon you in such a way that you are realigned with your own survival and the survival of others in such a way that maybe you're going to do something about it. And we're in the 50th anniversary of that, and we need to keep doing it. That's all I got.
Okay, so I suppose I'm obliged to apologize for the length of that clip, featuring everybody's favorite science expositor. Sorry, that's a lot of NDT. But I sort of love it when I come across bits like that. I mean, you really can't ask for a more perfect summation of so much through his little spiel there. I mean, where he says, a cosmic perspective can descend upon you and, make you realize that all of our problems are global problems. And if we want to survive as a species, and if you care about surviving as a species, then you will listen to science and you will do what science recommends, because that's what's going to save us from, whatever crisis or situation you're talking about, whether it's climate change or pandemics or the threat of terrorism or whatever other manufactured and controlled narrative you want to pick. It's all about globalism, and it's weird how that's just so obvious to some people and yet not for so many more. And so how strange is it to be looking at all this stuff, watching all these videos of all the draconian things going on in China, and then all the hyped up fear porn of the media coverage in the West, and so many layers of programming and agendas and angles coming through, some of which I didn't even see coming, like the whole, don't handle cash, don't use cash, because obviously you're touching it, and other people are touching this, and you're sharing germs with all this dirty paper money. I mean, slow clap for the global elites, I guess, or Satan for that one, because that's one I never had even considered before, and yet it's of course, right? So when they can really get the majority of people buying into the idea that cash is just dirty and unsanitary and potentially carrying some horrible, deadly disease, that sure fits into a globalist economic narrative quite nicely. So on the one hand, while getting hung up on the shape of the earth on so many levels is quite secondary in terms of it's clearly not the gospel. It's not going to save you being correct on your cosmology, but I will have to say that of the scores of people that I've met and gotten to know over the past few years who have come to the place of being willing to question the globe, I can't think of a single one of them where they needed anyone to then still push them to question the reality of globalism. They just go hand in hand. It's just, they see it. It's there. It's obvious. All these agendas suddenly become quite transparent because their cosmic perspective shifted, but not in the way that deGrasse Tyson is talking about. And their perspective on listening to quote-unquote science shifted. And that's what's so sort of mind-numbing about this whole media blitz that we're under, this whole event, whatever you want to call it. Event 202, I don't know. Is that there's so many narratives that should be completely contradictory and illogical in the minds of the people who already are listening to the mainstream media and listening to science, what science says. Air quotes around science every time I say science. I mean, just how much they're always talking about hand washing, like even in that clip. This is the great experiment. Are people actually going to listen to science? Like, everybody knows that that's not any sort of big controversial thing where they need to be told by science, well, you better wash your hands if you don't want to get germs or spread disease. Nobody's going to be resisting that. That's and other things, and whatever else science recommends, just kind of trails off. Or vaccines or spraying people down with disinfectant. I mean, they're way beyond just making everybody wash hands in China, obviously. And you have Western media outlets literally using the word draconian to describe the measures that the Chinese government is now taking, but they're saying, while they use the word draconian, there's no outrage or real criticism of violating human rights, or the only thing being questioned about the Chinese government from mainstream media is, are they reporting their death tolls correctly? Are they cooperating with the World Health Organization enough? But then in this perverse way, I just watched a clip a few days ago and then I couldn't find it again, but some local news outlet talking about checkpoints in Korea, South Korea, as they're doing in China and probably all over Asia, and I'm sure in Italy, there's, I don't know how many countries have checkpoints now, but where they take their temperature and then, like even in China, and I'm sure in Korea too, everybody has to put an app on their phone. So this little drone flies by and you scan the QR code and downloads the app. Then the app, tracks you, and it's openly connected to the police and openly giving you a red, yellow, or I would assume green is okay. Green means you're free to travel. And this is right on the tails of all the stuff that came out about the Chinese social credit system. What amazing timing, right? But anyways, so in Korea, they were doing the same things, and I guess they were probably using Korea as an example because it is a non-communist country. But suggesting that, how soon could we do, what, on the American news, talking about doing checkpoints to take your temperature and keep track of, because that's the big challenge, supposedly, is tracking all the cases and quarantining people and whatever else until we get a vaccine. Because, once we have a vaccine, everything will be good again, man. By that time, if we're talking a year to 18 months, people will be so sick of all the economic disruption and the societal, everything being shut down. Or, dude, how much time has to go by, actually, where the stock markets are down all around the world, and even just the threat of a economic recession, and travel restrictions and all this kind of stuff that's either an inconvenience at best, or, sadly for at least a lot of the people in China already, you're getting locked inside your apartment buildings and having police come and forcibly take your temperature and drag you away if your temperature is too high. Which again is something that, of course, the free and open Western mainstream media, where we love freedom and democracy so much, not a whisper about, the disturbing prospect of this huge nation that is already quite well known to deal with political dissidents in a way that, everyone knows that the police could come and show up and take you in for questioning and you're never seen again. And now we just have a crisis where a whole city's on lockdown and nobody's going in or out, and police are going around in vans and knocking on doors and taking people away. Talk about an opportune time for a totalitarian government to cull whatever individuals they think are needing to be culled. But wash your hands, and you'll be fine. Trust science. And you gotta think globally, but there's no globalist agenda. There's no globalist conspiracy theory. Just listen to science. But when I was sitting there watching this clip of deGrasse Tyson and this little Saturn rocket necktie that he thinks is so cool, when you just look at that right there, this emblem, this icon of a rocket, and he's pointing to the moon landings and Apollo, is this pivotal moment, right? That's when we got the cosmic perspective. When we were walking on the moon before we just suddenly stopped because we got enough cosmic perspective to last us for the next 50 years, right? But that rocket, it's just like so many other things where it simultaneously was invented as a weapon, as a missile, as a symbol of unimaginable death and destruction and worldwide global crises, kind of proportions. The prospect of thermonuclear war and radioactive fallout and all this stuff that suddenly wasn't such a big threat a few decades later. But it was simultaneously a symbol that was war and death, and then amazingly transformed into this cultural symbol for achievement and progress and overcoming amazing odds and defying limitation and seeking out answers and the absolute idol worship of science itself, to where it is an obelisk, it is a literal idol, because it's a visual representation of a deeper, completely humanistic belief system. And it's that same core, quote-unquote, cosmic perspective, that same religion that fuels all of the propaganda that's just pouring all over the world 24 hours a day right now on something that is seemingly so removed from cosmology questions. But no, it is all about a global perspective. The globalist perspective that we're all supposed to have, where there's no boundaries and there's no lines on the map, and we all share one ecosystem, one environment. We all share one globe floating in the vacuum. And so, wow, we should all better start acting like it and behaving as such. But yeah, without that willful scientific idolatry that you can see all over the place, then there is no one world order, one world system. And the Bible says there will be. And you can wake up and see it happening hour by hour, all the time. And that's just really terrifying for a lot of people. But for me, that's kind of the irony of this whole particular topic, the coronavirus thing, is because on the one, it involves so much fear-mongering and overhyped, creation of false panic in terms of this disease itself. I mean, so far in the United States, there is nothing to actually show that any of the people who've died could have died from any simple flu illness or whatever, but they tested positive for COVID-19, so, they never talk about what other health complications they were probably in the middle of already. But yeah, it's not something that's just killing people indiscriminately. So yeah, there's plenty to question on all sides of the narrative, and I think that's kind of half the point, is it's just such a fractured, fractalized thing that, who knows whether it does have something to do with EMF frequencies or just things like that. Vaccines were made mandatory in China right before this outbreak. A lot of people are pointing to that as not being a coincidence. And there's all sorts of things to consider on those, practical levels, but in some ways, all that stuff is kind of immaterial, because really it's about the narrative. And, Neil deGrasse Tyson just told you what the narrative is. Listen to science, obey science. I think he actually used the word obey. And globalism. And they don't say globalism, because just like they don't say scientism, because that would actually be too accurate. So yeah, you see all this false fear being hyped up to make people turn around and then, demand a cure, demand a vaccine. But if you have reservations about, trusting science in that direction, well then, that could potentially be a very big deal to the people who believe that is the unquestionable answer to the whole outbreak. But then, no concerns about, the UN and the WHO and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hosting an exercise with Johns Hopkins University. Sheesh. It really is like 1984 and Brave New World at the same time, really, with everything. But yeah, global problems requiring global solutions. I mean, you just see it again and again and again. And it's really it really comes down to either you see that as a natural progression of human evolution, or the inverse, which I would say is the biblical view of man's rejection of God, escalating and culminating into such a magnified state where all the draconian stuff can then come in, and is coming in. Because they're bought into the humanist fantasy. And the whole issue of, trusting the government is it's a huge part of the core of this whole narrative, not just in China but everywhere. So, and I think that's what Trump is all about, right? Everything is of course we're going into the next election, and you see how these are not all just disparate things that have nothing to do with each other. So who knows how far they're actually going to go with this particular iteration of the viral outbreak, narrative. But whatever pieces are put in place in terms of these public-private partnerships, like they're talking about in Event 201, they're essentially just textbook fascism. But of course they don't call it that either. But those things will remain in place long after the crisis is over, just like the Patriot Act and so many other things. All the legislation and all the agencies that are created, just like he's talking about with Earth Day. And so at the end of the day, you either buy into the idea that all these things are ultimately going to be working for the good of humanity and actually save us from diseases, which, by the way, you have to believe that they can evolve out of pigs and bats and other, living animals like they've been doing for millions of years. We understand all about viruses, right? It's all predicated on evolution as well. Every crisis that we're now facing in this modern era is like even Neil deGrasse Tyson's kind of describing it like, it's an experiment to see if we're actually going to, as a society, really rely on science or stay in our caveman backwards ways and die, We won't make it. And so when you really kind of boil down that kind of rhetoric, you really see how it's really not that big of a leap, how there could be people, in positions of power and influence and quote-unquote elite levels where eugenics is not outside of their thinking, and how it all kind of goes hand in hand. Just even by making a statement like that. On the one hand, it's like, how much should we be talking about this? Because aren't we just getting caught up in the hype ourselves and in the fear-mongering and the sensationalism or whatever, one way or another? You can call it all a hoax, or you can say it's way worse in Wuhan, or all sorts of things. But really, it's important to talk about because of this question of what your cosmic perspective is, in terms of how willing you are to acknowledge the reality of a globalist agenda, of the creation of a one-world economy and religion, even if that one-world system isn't on the surface level all under one obvious unified political banner or name or line on a map, to where there's one political leader who takes over them all. But you realize that there's all the apparatus, all the infrastructure. The globalist infrastructure is being put into place before, has to be, before you have a single ruler, a single system and a single government and a single AI and single, global mandates for the environment and for your health and your family planning. And, good grief. That Event 201 thing, so you do an exercise to role play, it's like LARPing sort of, to role play what you're going to do, like the kind of panel discussions you're going to have if this was really happening in real time. And then, so you go through this whole fake scenario, and then the net outcome of the fake scenario is that it was a catastrophic failure, and millions of people died, and you're just left going, what could we have done differently to prevent such a tragic, horrific event that, it crippled the economy for a decade or so, and all this stuff? Is that how you actually practice an exercise? You're just scripting the whole thing. It's not like there's some pandemic simulator. Of course, I'm sure they use all sorts of simulations, statistical simulators and things like that to justify whatever. But you step back and it's like, yeah, the whole point of doing this Event 201 hosted by the Gates Foundation and everything is, it's propaganda. Like, they didn't create fake news reports for them to just sit there in between maybe they watched them in between the panel conversations, I don't know, but no, it's just all, you're crafting a narrative. That's what all the news is, that's what all these TED Talks and late night TV junk and movies and everything. Right, that's pretty much one overarching narrative. And all the other crap about, Republicans versus Democrats and all, it's just distraction. And in the end, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, right? And being at peace with your own mortality, whether that happens when you're younger or late in life and through some kind of tragedy or just old age. The world has not come to terms with its mortality. And because in the end people are afraid of death, you have this whole global circus going on right now. While they're telling you that, like, the people most susceptible are elderly people and people with compromised immune systems, i.e. people that are already, statistically speaking, more likely to die soon anyways. And people are afraid of dying, whether it's through a nuclear blast or some pandemic disease or terrorist bombing, or shooting, or all these different ways that you can die. Even though, according to evolution, everything, so what? Why does it matter if you die now or 20 years from now? Why does it matter if the human species survives millions of years into the future or gets wiped out by a meteorite tomorrow? I mean, why does any of it matter in the end? If there's no God that you're going to stand in front of one day, no fears of having to one day come face to face with your maker, which they actually joked about in that clip as well, mocking God. I don't know, it's depressing, I guess, watching all this stuff, but not in the ways that I think a lot of people would think. It's depressing because you see how so many people are just believing lies about who they are, or the existence of their creator, or who to really trust and put your faith in, God or man. So yeah, pretty crazy times right now. Maybe a week from now it'll all be blown over, like Neil said. But even if it does, you can be sure that there will be a dozen other things ready to take over the media narrative, and more things will get wound together. And yeah, the globalist agenda is not going to stop until God brings it all to an end. So praise God that we know that He will, and we can look forward to spending eternity with Him because of what Christ has done for us.